Larissa Rodrigues grew up in a humble but close-knit family in Guara, just outside Ribeirão Preto, Brazil. Her parents were modest and reserved people, and they raised her with strong values of integrity, a strong work ethic, and family loyalty. From an early age, Larissa showed remarkable discipline. She trained in gymnastics, later graduated with a degree in sports science, and worked as a trainer and instructor at a fitness club. She led a healthy lifestyle, avoided harmful habits, and meticulously cared for her wellness. She had only one serious relationship with Luís Garnica, who became her first partner and later her husband. To the family, he seemed quiet and polite. Larissa believed in the ideal of a strong family, and despite strains in their relationship, she stayed committed to preserving the marriage. Luís Garnica came from a well-off background. His father had served as mayor of Pontal, and Luís himself was trained in medicine. But behind that veneer of success, he was self-centered and calculating. According to Larissa's relatives, at the beginning of their relationship, he had no steady income and depended on Larissa's mother, who sent him home-cooked meals. Over time, despite having a diploma, his finances never improved, and he struggled to support two parallel lives, his official marriage and a secret relationship. His standing among Larissa's friends and family deteriorated. He grew increasingly withdrawn, distant, and indifferent. Even during Larissa's mother's final days, he visited only when forced. In the last months of the marriage, Luís was emotionally detached, cold, and often degraded his wife about her appearance, avoiding any real communication. Despite her efforts to reconcile, he continued to move further away, ignoring the obvious signs of their relationship crisis. Elizabete Araújo, Luís's mother, played a pivotal role in this story. At 68, she appeared quiet and unassuming, but in reality, she was a manipulator with a troubling history. Her former husband and her daughter claimed she had a gambling problem and was deeply in debt. There were suspicions around her involvement in the mysterious death of a relative connected through financial dealings. She often asked acquaintances for money and was suspected of selling others' jewelry. Her behavior within the Garnica family drew mixed opinions. With Larissa, she maintained the image of a caring mother-in-law, yet she regularly shared confidential information with her son and withheld crucial details from her daughter-in-law. Over time, it became clear she had played a decisive role in tearing the family apart and setting the stage for the tragic events that followed. These three figures, Larissa, Luís, and Elizabete, became the central players in a chain of events whose outcomes were irreversible. In 2025, tensions between Larissa and Luís escalated dramatically. Their conflicts had become a regular occurrence, and any remaining trust was shattered. Luís's behavior grew increasingly distant. He often claimed to be working late or on call, but in reality, he was frequently meeting with another woman named Leticia. Larissa didn't know the woman's name at first, but she began to suspect he was seeing someone else, especially after noticing odd changes in his routine and his frequent irritation for no clear reason. Her suspicions were confirmed after she discreetly followed him one evening in mid-March. Larissa spotted Luís heading toward Leticia's house on a night he claimed to be working an overnight shift. Not long after that, she found personal items in his car, along with a medical-grade anesthetic, which clearly indicated a secretive relationship. She confided in Elizabete, her mother-in-law, hoping for understanding. Instead, Elizabete quickly told Luís about the discovery. Larissa didn't act on impulse. Despite her personal disappointment, she still tried to preserve the family. According to her father, she wanted to have a calm conversation with Luís and find a peaceful resolution. Over the next few days, she spoke privately with close friends about the possibility of divorce, but asked them not to get involved. Meanwhile, a friend offered her temporary use of an unoccupied apartment to help her take a step back and think things through. On March 15, 2025, Larissa told Luís about her decision to end the marriage. She also confirmed her intentions to a trusted friend. Her goal was to reduce tension and prepare for a respectful separation. Larissa informed her father as well and asked him not to intervene, to avoid triggering any confrontation between Luís and her brother. The following day, March 16th, Elizabete Araújo began researching highly toxic substances online. That same day, she offered Larissa a homemade soup. Larissa, unaware of any danger, accepted the meal. Within hours, she began experiencing severe gastrointestinal symptoms, including cramps and nausea. Despite feeling unwell, Larissa assumed the discomfort was caused by stress or possibly spoiled food. On March 18th, Larissa once again opened up to a close friend, expressing how drained she felt, physically and emotionally. She said her energy was slipping away and shared her concern that Luís continued to avoid any meaningful conversation. At the same time, Elizabete, his mother, had become unusually attentive, bringing food, initiating frequent visits, and insisting on helping Larissa, despite previously criticizing her for wanting to leave the marriage. By March 19th, Larissa confided in a relative about her worsening condition. She described sudden chills, weakness, abdominal pain, and an overwhelming sense of dread. She noted that she had never experienced anything like it before and that the symptoms had persisted for several days. That message would become one of the last times she openly discussed her health. On March 20th, Larissa told her father she no longer saw a future in the marriage, though she was still hoping to avoid a public fallout. She wanted the divorce to be amicable, if possible. That day, Elizabete seemed calm but continued bringing over food. Larissa, although feeling unwell, didn't yet suspect a link between the meals and her condition. She assumed her health issues stemmed from emotional stress. Then came March 21st. Elizabete arrived again with homemade soup. Larissa's condition took a drastic turn for the worse. By late that evening, she stopped responding to calls and messages. A few hours later, the devastating news came. She had passed away. On the morning of March 22, 2025, Luís Garnica reported that he had found his wife unconscious in their apartment. He claimed he'd just returned from a night shift, walked in, and found Larissa lying on the floor. According to his account, he immediately began CPR and called emergency services. However, discrepancies between his story and the actual evidence began to surface within hours of the investigation. One critical detail was a message Luís sent to Leticia. At 10:25 a.m., he texted his partner to inform her that Larissa had passed. Just 9 minutes later, at 10:34 a.m., paramedics arrived. Yet when they entered, Luís was still performing resuscitation efforts, claiming Larissa was showing signs of life. The medical team quickly determined otherwise. She was already in a state of rigor, making revival impossible. Emergency personnel documented that her body was cold, with no pulse or breathing, and her skin showed clear signs consistent with an extended time of death. When police arrived at the scene, one of the first things they noted was Luísa's insistence on a rapid cremation. He didn't notify Larissa's family right away about her passing and took it upon himself to begin arranging the necessary paperwork for cremation. This immediately raised red flags for investigators, especially since Larissa's cultural background strictly followed burial traditions, with cremation never being considered. Another detail added to the mounting suspicion. Luísa's sister, Viviani Garnica, was already at the apartment when emergency responders arrived. Building security confirmed she entered the complex around the same time as the medical team. This led to the obvious question: how did she get there before the police? And why was she the first person inside the apartment? At the scene, officers noticed that the environment had been tampered with. Bedsheets had been stripped, rolled-up towels with what appeared to be reddish stains were found nearby, and the laundry basket contained items possibly used for cleanup. The paramedic examining Larissa's body took note of undigested food in her stomach. This detail would later become a critical piece of evidence, prompting a full toxicology analysis. The initial assumption of a sudden cardiac event began to shift toward concerns about a possible poisoning. Luísa's actions on the day of Larissa's passing began to appear staged, as if designed to present the situation as an unexpected tragedy. The timeline, the messages he sent, and his behavior before and after emergency services arrived painted a picture that seemed increasingly rehearsed. Investigators also began to scrutinize Viviani's involvement more closely, noting that she appeared to have known about Larissa's passing before any formal notification. At first glance, we seemed like a distraught husband caught in a crisis. But as investigators dug deeper, examining documents, message logs, and expert findings, the surface narrative started to unravel. Attention shifted from simply understanding what happened to examining who may have played a role in the moments immediately after Larissa's life ended. Following the official announcement of Larissa Rodrigues' death, both Luís Garnica and his sister Viviani came under increasing scrutiny. Within just 24 hours of the incident, they had already taken steps that raised serious concerns. It was discovered that the day after Larissa's passing, financial transactions were attempted using her bank accounts. Luís used her debit card to purchase items at a pharmacy and also attempted to withdraw cash from an ATM. Some transactions were flagged and declined due to suspicious activity. One attempt to access her savings account failed due to automatic security blocks. Later, bank officials confirmed that the attempted transactions came from devices registered to Luís. At a local bank branch in Pontal, a city tied to the Garnica family, a teller reported an unusual request. Viviani, Luís's sister, attempted to obtain account information for Larissa. The issue? Viviani had no legal authority to access those records. Larissa's account was registered in a different region, and her attempt to retrieve private financial data without a formal power of attorney was officially logged as an unauthorized access attempt. This incident drew immediate attention from investigators and marked the first documented case of third-party interference in Larissa's affairs. Meanwhile, Larissa's family, especially her brother and father, were pushing for a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding her passing. Troubled by rumors and inconsistencies, Larissa's brother sought legal counsel from attorney Matias Fernando. On March 24th, 2 days after her death, consultations with legal representatives began. Despite online speculation suggesting Larissa may have taken her own life, her loved ones firmly rejected that possibility. According to those close to her, Larissa had no history of mental health struggles, maintained an active lifestyle, was in therapy, and had clear plans for her future, including filing for divorce. The attorney hired by Larissa's family demanded that no cremation take place until a full toxicological analysis was completed. This move proved critical to the case. The pathologist ordered a comprehensive examination, including toxicology screenings. While the initial exam did not pinpoint an immediate cause of death, the lab tests became central to developing the leading theory. At the same time, investigators turned their focus to digital evidence. They combed through text messages, GPS data, and call logs. Recovered chats between Luís, Viviani, and others provided deeper insight. One particularly telling exchange showed Viviani advising Luís to be cautious with their phones and not to confuse devices. In another message, she reminded him to mention a supposed history of heart conditions in Larissa's family when speaking to authorities. These texts were interpreted as an attempt to shape a false narrative and craft a medically plausible explanation for what had occurred. While the investigation remained active, the family's lawyer successfully petitioned for all of Larissa's financial accounts to be frozen and for restricted access to her assets. Authorities were notified across relevant agencies. These legal safeguards were essential in preventing further unauthorized actions by Luís and those allegedly working with him. At this point, investigators completely ruled out the theory of self-harm. The actions of those involved suggested a deliberate attempt to manage the situation and eliminate evidence rather than the natural grief expected after a tragic loss. Every move Luís and Viviani made following Larissa's passing appeared calculated, aimed at reducing exposure and covering their tracks. These patterns were enough to launch the formal phase of criminal proceedings. Roughly 1 month before Larissa Rodrigues passed, another family member died under mysterious circumstances, Nátalia Garnica, daughter of Elizabete Araújo. At the time, the incident received no public attention. But once Larissa's case gained momentum, law enforcement began re-examining Natalia's death and quickly uncovered a series of unsettling parallels. Nátalia lived in Pontal with a long-term partner in a domestic relationship. Shortly before her passing, she had a major falling out with her mother, Elizabete. Elizabete strongly opposed Natalia's plans to build a family and become a parent. Their argument centered around inheritance issues and shares in the family business. Following the disagreement, Natalia's partner left the house, leaving her alone with Elizabete, something relatives later described as highly unusual. In the days that followed, Nátalia complained of feeling increasingly unwell, but Elizabete never called for medical help or contacted emergency responders. Instead, she reached out to Luís and Viviani, who were in another city at the time. The drive from Ribeirão Preto to Pontal takes about 40 minutes. During this time, Nátalia remained without assistance. By the time Luís and Viviani arrived, Natalia's condition had worsened significantly. She was later taken to a hospital, where she passed. Eyewitnesses claimed that despite his medical training, Luís didn't push for emergency care and seemed more focused on when the death certificate would be issued. That detail was documented and became the subject of further investigation. Initially, Natalia's death was classified as natural, but as Larissa's case unfolded, new findings began to cast serious doubt on that conclusion. One red flag was the unexplained death of Natalia's dog, Bobby, 2 weeks before the tragedy. Relatives reported that Bobby had no known health issues. Authorities approved the exhumation of the pet for toxicology testing, based on a theory that poison might have been tested on the animal. Natalia's father, Antonio Garnica, revealed during questioning that Elizabete was facing serious financial problems. He stated she had debts exceeding 300,000 reals, some of which were linked to gambling. Nátalia had held a 16% share in the family business, which, due to her not having any underage dependents, passed directly to her mother upon her death. Elizabete's alleged efforts to secure full control over those assets led to major tensions with her ex-husband. Antonio also testified that not long before she passed, Nátalia had mentioned receiving threats from her mother regarding her personal life. Further disturbing details emerged about Elizabete's past. Years earlier, one of her friends recalled a strange episode. After having tea with Elizabete, she experienced sharp abdominal pain followed by unconsciousness. Emergency care saved her, and doctors later suspected a toxic substance had been involved. However, that case was never formally investigated. As Larissa's story gained public attention, more people connected to the Garnica family began stepping forward, sharing concerns about Elizabete Araújo's behavior. One woman reported that Elizabete once asked her to sign a power of attorney to authorize a large financial transaction from a government payout. Elizabete framed it as a favor to help with the paperwork, but in reality, it appeared she intended to gain access to the funds herself. After reviewing the series of suspicious patterns, investigators reached a preliminary conclusion. Nátalia may have been the first confirmed victim, and her dog potentially part of a test run for what followed. The combination of poisoning, delayed medical response, hidden symptoms, and a motive rooted in inheritance formed a disturbing picture. From this point forward, the case took on a much broader scope. A deeper analysis of these incidents revealed a consistent pattern in Elizabete's financial behavior. She repeatedly sought new sources of income, pressured those close to her, and manipulated legal access to property and assets. After Nátalia and Larissa passed, these tactics intensified. In the context of mounting debts and financial instability, her motives became a central focus of the investigation. Amid the dual investigations into the deaths of Larissa and Nátalia, law enforcement began uncovering information that hinted at additional, potentially criminal episodes linked to Elizabete Araújo. One of the earliest tips came from her former husband, Antonio Garnica. He told investigators that 4 years earlier, his cousin, Elide, had died under suspicious circumstances. During her life, Elide had lent money to Elizabete, and the day before her passing, they had met in person. After that meeting, Elide stopped answering calls. Her body was later found in her apartment with no signs of struggle, and the cause of death was never determined. Years later, as investigators connected dots, that incident was reclassified as a possible criminal case. Another case involved a woman who had been friendly with Elizabete. Years after an odd incident, she finally spoke out. Following a tea visit at Elizabete's home, she suddenly felt dizzy, nauseous, and disoriented. Elizabete offered her a headache remedy, a blue capsule. She took the pill, but was later hospitalized that night with suspected poisoning. Doctors documented toxic exposure to an unknown substance, but the woman never filed a report at the time. She later admitted she was afraid of becoming entangled in legal battles. Eventually, she reached out to Larissa's family attorney after media reports surfaced about possible poisonings. Yet another concerning event came to light. Elizabete had attempted to obtain power of attorney from a woman expecting to receive a court-ordered compensation. The woman, alarmed by Elizabete's persistence, later told investigators she feared she might have been a future target. Her statement was formally included in the case files. According to law enforcement, a clear pattern was beginning to emerge in Elizabete's actions. She would first establish close relationships with women who were financially stable, earn their trust, and shortly afterward, they would suffer sudden and unexplained health issues. Given these accounts, investigators began pursuing a new theory that they might be dealing with a series of connected incidents rather than isolated ones. Law enforcement officials issued a public call urging anyone who had experienced suspicious behavior from Elizabete Araújo to contact authorities. Other investigative units also took interest in the case, including those who had previously handled unexplained deaths connected to the Garnica family. The growing number of similar episodes, marked by a recognizable behavioral pattern, led to a working theory that this could be part of a larger series of related incidents. Once the toxicology reports came in, the investigation entered a decisive phase. Forensic specialists confirmed the presence of a compound derived from zinc phosphide, a banned toxic substance, in Larissa Rodrigues' system. This finding became a pivotal moment. Up until then, Luís and Elizabete had claimed that Larissa passed from natural causes. Another critical piece of the puzzle came from surveillance footage at the residential complex. Security cameras showed that on the morning of March 22nd, Luís arrived at the apartment later than he had claimed, and Viviani showed up shortly before emergency services were called. These details directly contradicted their official statements. Taken together, the presence of a toxic compound, suspicious online searches, misleading explanations, tampered evidence, and timeline inconsistencies, these facts formed a clear chain of evidence. Investigators concluded that Larissa's death was not a random event, but a carefully coordinated act carried out by multiple individuals. The evidence didn't just suggest wrongdoing, it presented a legally viable case of premeditated criminal activity. By mid-April 2025, the investigation reached the stage of formal charges. Based on forensic data, digital correspondence, and verified discrepancies in witness accounts, police filed charges against three primary individuals, Elizabete Araújo, Luís Garnica, and his sister, Viviani Garnica. The main charge involved the intentional death of Larissa Rodrigues through poisoning. Investigators determined that Elizabete had prepared Larissa's meals in the final days of her life, actively researched toxic substances, created a plan to conceal the act, and coordinated the actions of her family members. Luís was charged as an accomplice. He was aware of his mother's intentions, failed to intervene, concealed signs of poisoning, and helped destroy evidence afterward. He was also the one who pushed for rapid cremation, a move that could have eliminated the chance to detect any toxic substances. Viviani Garnica was named as an accomplice. Her role included coordination with her brother, erasing digital traces, attempting to access the victim's bank accounts, and helping conceal key details surrounding the incident. Recovered messages from her phone confirmed she knew about Larissa's death in advance and was involved in planning how to speak with law enforcement and medical professionals. Simultaneously, a separate investigation was launched into the circumstances surrounding Nátalia Garnica's passing, a criminal case on suspicion of foul play. This decision was based on Elizabete's unusual behavior on the day her daughter died, particularly her refusal to seek medical help and signs suggesting possible poisoning. Another contributing factor was the earlier death of Nátalia's dog, which had also raised alarms. While formal charges in Nátalia's case had not yet been filed, the evidence was placed in a separate investigative file. The charges against all three individuals were formally submitted to the district attorney's office. Each was summoned for questioning. Following the interrogation, both Elizabete and Luís were taken into custody. Viviani was placed under travel restrictions, required to remain within the region, and ordered to surrender her passport. Meanwhile, the court approved a request to seize Garnica family assets and freeze all accounts tied to the suspects. The case sparked significant public interest. Journalists, advocacy groups, and legal experts began a national conversation about shortcomings in addressing domestic aggression, legal loopholes in women's protection, and missed warning signs. Many pointed out that the tragedy might have been avoided had social services intervened earlier. At this stage, the charges were formally established, and the investigation had concluded its core evidence gathering. The next step was trial, a process expected to bring every truth to light before the public. The trial in the case of Larissa Rodrigues began in July 2025 under intense media and public scrutiny. The central defendants were three individuals: Elizabete Araújo, Luís's mother, Luís Garnica, Larissa's husband, and his sister, Viviani Garnica. Charges included intentional wrongdoing with aggravating circumstances, complicity, destruction of evidence, and attempted misappropriation of assets. During the first hearing, prosecutors laid out the full timeline of events, starting from Larissa's deteriorating health and attempts to poison her, to the recovered digital communications and inconsistencies in the suspect's behavior. Medical experts were a key part of the prosecution's case. They confirmed the presence of zinc phosphide in Larissa's body. Investigators also highlighted search history and messaging between Elizabete and her family. The defense team attempted to challenge the toxicology findings, arguing that poisoning couldn't be confirmed with absolute certainty. However, the tests had been conducted by independent labs, and the court found no grounds to question their validity. Luís claimed he had no knowledge of his mother's actions, but text messages and audio recordings presented in court revealed that he had coordinated with Elizabete and Viviani following his wife's death. Viviani maintained she was simply trying to support her brother and was unaware of any actual wrongdoing. But the court examined her active efforts to erase digital traces, her attempts to access Larissa's accounts, and her efforts to mislead investigators. Her role was classified as aiding and abetting, with deliberate obstruction of justice. At the same time, the case involving the death of Nátalia Garnica was reviewed. Although there was no toxicology data available, the court deemed the suspicions against Elizabete well-founded. Witness testimonies, behavioral patterns, and the inheritance motive were accepted as part of the larger narrative, adding weight to the charges. In his final statement, the judge noted that the crime had been committed coldly, with financial gain as the motive, and that the use of poison constituted an especially cruel act. The offenders made calculated efforts to cover their tracks, hide the truth, and profit from the outcome. The court ruled Elizabete to be the mastermind, Luís as an accomplice, and Viviani as an accessory who actively participated in the concealment of the crime. Sentencing: Elizabete Araújo, 30 years in a security facility, with no eligibility for parole during the first 20 years. Luís Garnica, 22 years in prison, including a permanent ban from practicing medicine. Viviani Garnica, 12 years total, 6 of which to be served under restricted movement with mandatory electronic monitoring and supervision. Larissa's family expressed satisfaction with the verdict. Her father and brother attended every hearing, accompanied by their attorney, who'd taken personal responsibility for the case from day one. It was thanks to his efforts that evidence was preserved, bank accounts were frozen, and a second investigation was launched. Following the sentencing, Larissa Rodrigues' case became a landmark. Several states initiated reviews of similar unexplained deaths where autopsies had not been performed. Lawmakers also began considering reforms to require mandatory toxicology screenings in deaths occurring under suspicious circumstances. The case concluded with a harsh but just sentence. What had been presented as a tragic accident was unmasked as a calculated crime, exposed thanks to the persistence of Larissa's loved ones, the dedication of legal professionals, and the thoroughness of investigators. The court's ruling served as a powerful reminder: even the most carefully orchestrated act can't escape justice when the truth has committed out. Thanks for watching. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing.